everyone, it's Chris Mandigma of Tirsia Tactical, and today we're talking about choosing an everyday carry or EDC knife. The first thing I would take a look at is what do you need it for? Why do you want to carry an EDC knife? Are you a law enforcement officer? Or are you a military operator out on deployment? Are you going out on a hunting or a fishing trip? Or just an average guy or gal who wanted to have a utilitarian tool in their pocket or in their purse at the ready? Now, before we take a closer look and a deeper dive into what type of knife you should be looking at, I want you guys to take a look at the disclaimer coming up. Check it out. I really like following the KISS concept. Keep it simple. So for the purposes of this video, we're going to focus on two factors to help you choose your EDC knife. The first one is a type of knife, and the second one is the type of blade. Let's take a look at the two most common types of knives. The first one will be the fixed blade. Second one will be the folding knife. While some might argue, well, what about the karambit? What about the butterfly knife? Or what about the switchblade? You know what? We can go on and on. But what we're trying to do is educate people better, whether, again, you're a hunter, fisherman, law enforcement officer, or just the everyday person who's trying to decide what type of EDC they want to carry and why they should be carrying it. This will help simplify that process. The fixed blade, to keep it as simple as possible, is one piece of steel which doesn't require any sort of action or manipulation to expose the blade so that you can use it. The only action that you actually require is to pull it out of the sheath, and then you can go and do whatever you need to do with the blade. Unlike folding knives where you have to flip it open or flick it open or use some sort of mechanical button that's going to deploy or expose that blade, there is some room for error. The reason why I'm bringing up the room for error is if you're in the capacity as a law enforcement officer, for example, or a military operator, and you're fighting for your life, I don't want to rely on some sort of mechanical device that has some prone to failure when I need to pull out that knife and it doesn't open when I need it to, or because it has some tiny little switch or device on it for me to expose the blade, and under a high risk, highly volatile situation, my fine motor control might be shot and I might not be able to deploy that blade when I need it. When we take a look at the fixed blade, when I pull that blade out of the sheath, it's ready to go 100%. All fixed blades will have a sheath. The sheaths are different. Some sheaths will be made out of leather. Some will have some sort of leather material. So there will be some play because they're a little bit softer. They're more flexible. Some people like that. They like that traditional look. For all the tactical guys out there, some of them will opt for the black kydex or some sort of dyed kydex, which is a hardened plastic. With these sheaths, they're also going to have belt attachments. With the belt attachments, you'll find ones that have the Blade Tech belt clip or either the Ulti clip. Now, what you prefer is going to really depend on where you're going to ultimately decide to carry your knife. So the pros and cons for each one. The Blade Tech. The Blade Tech will accommodate almost every standard waistline belt out there because you can adjust the Blade Tech to accommodate that on the different widths. The problem with that is the Blade Tech is a little bit thicker, so it will have a tendency to stick away or away from your waistline just a little bit more. I don't know how picky you are, but again, that's something that I would recommend that you would check out personally and not just look it up online and hope for the best. Then when we're talking about Ulti clips, the Ulti clips are really great. They're a little bit smaller in the footprint, but they won't accommodate some of these thicker belts because of how small the clip is. But when we're taking a look at if I wanted to put it into my pocket, it will clip onto my pant pocket pretty nicely. Another factor you need to consider when you were working with sheaths or the fixed blades with their sheath is what type of retention. Retention on these is generally tension based, which means if I wanted to loosen it up, it might be a couple screws, or there might be a slight indentation in the design of the knife in itself and the way it is designed inside the sheath to be able to hold that in. So when we take a look at something like this, where this is pretty good because it takes a little bit more force for me to pull out before I actually get this blade out, which is nice. But you also don't want where it's the retention is so high that if I needed to access my blade, let's say in a life or death situation, and I can't get that blade out, I'm actually fighting the sheath instead of the person who's trying to kill me, well, that's going to be a problem as well. So that's why I'd always recommend that once you start to take a look at the different blades out there, is actually get your hands on it. Go to the store, get your hands on the knife, get your hands on the sheath, and get a feel for how does it feel in your hand? What's that retention like? If I did this, will the blade actually fall out of sheath? Because you might end up on the ground, you might end up tripping, and all of a sudden you've got a blade that's falling out. So just take a look at that and make sure that the retention is pretty solid on these Kydex sheaths. The other consideration I want you all to take a look at is the handle. The handle is often misunderstood or underrated in terms of how important it is when you're selecting your knife. When we take a look at this fixed blade, which is the CM1 Station, it's got a pretty beefy handle, and it doesn't matter how I hold that knife, whether it's an ice pick grip or the forehand grip. Once I deploy that knife, I'm going to have a pretty good solid grip of it because I got quite a bit of real estate to it. But when we take a look at a knife like this, which is also a fixed blade, it has the ring on it. Now the ring blades are fine, but what you're starting to take a look at is you are working with a lot smaller real estate, so which means if I needed to pull this out in a critical situation, I have a larger room for error because I have smaller real estate to be able to grab this knife out of the sheath. So it's just something I want you to consider. And while some might think that the ring blade is really cool because they see it on karambits or people doing twirly fancy things with that blade, I'm not sure how functional it is to that when I just need to get my hands on the handle really well and then use it when I need to use it. And I can't have any room for error because it's obviously coming out for a reason. Before I talk about the types of blades on the different types of knives, I want you to check out the link below. Get to the link, send me your email address, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a document with a quick reference guide of what we're talking about in this video, from the types of knives and the types of blades, and it'll help you get a better idea of what actually is out there without getting too inundated of what's actually out on the World Wide Web. While we're on the topic of fixed blades, I'm going to talk about the K-Bar TDI. I used to carry this back in the day, and I actually stopped carrying it, not because of the knife itself, but more so because of the sheath. The sheath, well, it was just junk. The belt clip attachment itself was bent out of shape, couldn't bend it back no matter what I did, and I just wasn't happy with the way it was attached to my belt and where I had it located. Having said that, I also found an aftermarket manufacturer who produced one out of Kydex for this. Unfortunately, I wasn't happy with the retention. The blade kept on falling out. The minute adjustments to keep the blade retained, it wasn't working out for me, and I didn't want to risk losing this or it being taken off of me easily while I had that in its sheath. So I completely discarded it and I stopped carrying it, and I went with other options. But this is a good option because it is still a fixed blade. It's a little bit more compact. And in other videos, I am going to talk about where to carry your EDC blade, especially if you're a law enforcement officer or a military operator, and what makes it most effective. But again, this is something that you can take a look at. Again, I'm not endorsing K-Bar TDI, nor is there any sort of sponsorship. But again, for those who are wondering as to why is this one curved and what makes it that much better or worse. All right, moving on to folding knives. Folding knives are a lot more compact and probably the most common ones that most people will get. They're for the most part relatively inexpensive and accessible at most stores. When we take a look at the folding knife, they're more streamlined. They don't take up a lot of space because the folding or the blade does fold into the handle in itself. And they all have different mechanisms to be able to deploy the blade. This particular one, I really like this Kershaw blade, which has become one of my favorites. It has the flipper on it. I like the ones with the flipper because as soon as I pull it out of the pocket, I can quickly deploy that blade. Again, the action is nice and smooth. The flipper is easily pulled down, and then it allows that blade to come out. Then you're also going to see different folding knives as well, where they might have the circle right inside the blade, basically a hole where I can get my middle finger or index finger in there, or even the thumb, and flick that blade open. That's not really one of the favorite ones that I like. Spider Tenacious is one of the more common ones that has that design, and a lot of people love it, and that's awesome. Again, Find what works for you. This particular Gerber blade has the little nub right there, and that nub allows me to also get my finger. Doesn't matter which one. It takes practice and deploy that blade. Some are a little bit smoother, some of them are a little bit tight. It depends on how much the screws are tightened on those for able to get that blade out. So again, this is one of those where how big are my hands? How big is the blade? Do I like the action on this? Does it work for me? If it doesn't, move on to the next one. Find what works well for you or what feels natural. Okay, one of the more not talked about features of a knife, specifically the folding knife, is the way the pocket clip is oriented. What you need to take a look at is, if I'm going to put this into my pocket, is which way do I want it oriented? So with the particular Kershaw that I use, it's got the thumb flipper or the finger flip here. So when I pull that out of my pocket, my index finger is already here on the flipper. So as it comes out, I can quickly get it deployed. So it's nice and smooth. It's an easy transition, deployable for me. For other designs, you're going to find that the belt clip might be oriented the other way. So when I pull this blade out, as it comes out, I actually have to change the orientation of the blade this way to be able to flip that out. It's not the way I like it. Again, I don't find this as fast. My hands are a little bit smaller compared to some other people, and they might actually get this to work for them, but it's not my preferred method. So what you might want to take a look at, if you find a knife that speaks to you, is you might want to look for one where the clip itself can be reoriented in different positions, maybe even on the other side. And you're going to notice that is if it has other screws or tiny screw holes where you can remount that pocket clip to a different position onto your folding knife. So just look out for that little feature there. All right, so using the CM1 as an example, this one has the Tonto blade with a straight edge to it only on one side. Again, designed for clean cuts, you know, straight through, nothing fancy, nothing can get caught on it. Again, it really depends on what your purpose is. There's lots of other ones out there, from half straight edge to half serrated to fully serrated to curved blade to ones that are shaped like a sheep's foot, ones that are shaped like an eagle's claw, like the karambit. Those ones will be in the reference guide. The ones I'm going to focus on today is the fixed or the straight edged, and the next one that I'm going to talk about is the half serrated one. Okay, and the second knife here that I'm going to show you, again, this blade has half straight edge and half serrated. So the straight edge I've already talked about, but the serration part is designed to rip through things. So if we're looking at a thick piece of rope that I want to cut through and on a camping trip, the straight edge won't cut through. I can start to rip away at it with the serrated part of the blade. So, you know, if you like kind of best of both worlds, you can select that particular one, half straight edge and half serrated. There are some knives out there that are fully serrated. I wouldn't recommend that unless you're in the business of completely trying to rip through things constantly or trying to get through thick rope constantly. If you've got a good sharp knife, a really good sharp knife, you should be able to get through most stubborn pieces of fabric or material with a proper knife. There are also some blade options out there where it's double-edged on both sides. Again, it might be double-edged, it might be straight edge on one side and then serrated on the other side, or it might just be straight on both sides. Again, there are pros and cons to this, but why would there be a double edge to this? Well, one could be depending on how I have that knife oriented and carried on my person. When I pull that out, it doesn't matter what grip that I'm holding it in, that I could still hack this way or cut this way, or if I happen to pull it out with my support hand this way, again, I can cut this way or hook in this way. So it really depends if that is your preference to have a double-edged blade versus only having it single. Also, in some regions, going back to the disclaimer, please make sure of your local and regional laws to make sure that it is permitted to have double-edged blades in your possession. If you're in the law enforcement or military world, you're probably going to want to select an EDC that has a trainer. The purposes for the trainer is so that I can practice deploying it, I can practice training with it, working on my combatives, without my partner or myself getting injured, because I'm using a dulled down, non-sharpened version. So with the CM1, I've got the CM1 blade here, and here's the training version of it. So the training version, which some companies will make in different materials, this particular one is an aluminum trainer, which isn't sharp. It is a little bit thicker, but there's no pointed edges on it. It's all been rounded off, which makes it safe. Okay, so that is one of the options there, is take a look at that. Some will go to the extent of where they will actually wrap the handle. They'll put the proper handle on it, make it sure that it fits into the sheath as well. But then you're also starting to look at the cost being driven up, because there is extra work being driven into that to make it as close to the original as possible. But I think if you can get a pretty solid aluminum trainer that matches for the most part the blade in itself, you're good to go. Just make sure that it comes with the trainer as much as possible. So going back to the ring blade as an example, this one has its training version as well, which is one of the reasons why I got this version of that. So with the training version of that, they've actually gone to the extent of changing it and putting it into a different color so that you can easily see the differentiation of that you're working with a training blade. It is no different than in the law enforcement world, where we're working with training pistols. We've got our training blue gun or red gun. The training pistols are generally colored a little bit colored differently, so that it's a quick visual identification for us that we are working with a training tool versus the live tool. So as you can see, with this particular one, there's no sharp edges to it, and there's nothing sharp to it. Okay, so I've tried to keep it as simple as possible, and I hope that is able to help you guys out to choose your EDC and maybe make it a little bit simpler in that selection process. In future videos, I'm going to be talking about, push daggers. Maybe some of you guys are asking, why do you talk about push daggers, or the karambits, or blades that are made out of G10 and other hardened materials. Again, I'll talk about that in other videos, but I wanted to make it as simple as possible for the ones that are relatively new to this, for you to be able to select what type of knives are out there and which are the most common ones, and as to why you might choose them. If you have any questions, you know where to reach us. Get to the website, send an email. Aside from that, see you at the next video. Train safe.